Well, as the fall sitting of the House comes to an end, let's spend a little time with the Leader of the Official Opposition, Andrew Scheer. Good to see you again.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming to speak with me. I'll talk a little bit about the end of the sitting, and we'll look ahead a little bit to 2019. But let's start with the escalating conflict with China. We have a Canadian being detained there. This seems to be escalating. And I want to get a sense from you how you think the government's handling it.
Well, first I will acknowledge that this is a very difficult situation for the current government. We're in a place where our traditional allies a number of times now have not been with this current government as we face different challenges. You know, we saw what happened with the reaction from Saudi Arabia. Now here we have the situation unfolding with the Chinese government. My takeaway on this is that we have a long way to go before our government should be pursuing closer ties with the Chinese government when we're looking at things like this government wanting to go down the route for a free trade deal. When we still have instances of state-owned enterprises operating within Canada, anything talking about purchasing of sensitive technology, we have a lot of work to do before that type of relationship can be established.
What would you be doing differently? Right
well,
now?
I think the key is to understand that Canada, when we're dealing with China, has to understand that we can't be naive about it. I think one of the problems with Justin Trudeau is that, you know, he pursued this free trade deal. He has admired the basic dictatorship of China. A lot of the reforms that have gone on in the economy in China have led to a great deal of economic growth, but the reforms politically for transparency, for human rights, for independence of various institutions, there's a long way to go there. And that's why Conservatives are raising the alarm on things like selling sensitive Canadian technology to Chinese governments.
Or allowing Huawei into the 5G infrastructure.
Exactly.
Okay, so would you be taking a harder line with China as Prime Minister, even if it means sacrificing possible economic growth with China?
Well, I think we have to stand up for interest on this, and to say with the government of China, look, let's move towards closer economic ties if we want to facilitate buying and selling of goods between our two countries. When we're looking at investments into different areas, absolutely we should be working towards that, but we should be very strategic about it. And saying up front, rushing around, Justin Trudeau going to China, you know, pleading for a free trade deal, I believe gave the Chinese government a lot of leverage. I'd rather see a government, and the course of action I would pursue is to approach things in a very strategic way and say, look, we're happy to talk about areas where we can partner, where we can facilitate trade, but we're not just going to open things up altogether, because there are still so many state-owned enterprises. There's still a big gap between transparency and accountability in Canada versus what goes on in China, and that has to be addressed before we move closer.
Can I talk? I want to get your view on what I suggest maybe kind of a bubbling unity issue. We're seeing a fledgling boycott process taking place in Alberta against the province of Quebec over the fact Quebec doesn't want a pipeline going through the province. And at the same time as we're hearing that Quebec is a very big beneficiary of equalization payments. A lot of that comes from the oil revenues in Alberta. The country's getting split on the energy issue over carbon taxes. And I guess, what would you do if you were in this situation as Prime Minister? Would you say to Quebec, I'm pushing a pipeline through that province in the national interest because that's what the country needs? Well,
you've hit the nail on the head in identifying a growing problem, and it does seem to be that every time Liberals are in power, we do have these national unity issues because Liberals don't seem to be able to thread the needle of respecting provincial areas of jurisdiction and also standing up for things that are in the national interest and ensuring that balance in Confederation works. I know when I go to Quebec, I talk to motorists in Quebec, I talk to consumers in Quebec. People in Quebec are not happy about the fact that Canada imports oil from Saudi Arabia. That is truly dirty oil. That is oil that comes from a regime that has a terrible...
As Prime Minister, would you try to push a pipeline through Quebec?
As Prime Minister, I would absolutely work towards linking Western Canadian energy to Eastern Canadian markets. And I believe that the people in Quebec and around the country understand that pipelines are the safest way to move that energy, that getting it off of rails is better for safety, better for the environment, and it displaces foreign oil. So I believe that there's a way to do this in a way that will speak to the concerns, both environmental and others, First Nations, done properly.
Right, but you're talking about how to convince Quebecers that a pipeline is a good idea. Would you exert all the powers you have as Prime Minister? Could a Prime Minister say, we're putting this pipeline through your province, like it or not?
So I've spoken before about the need for the federal government to protect areas of federal jurisdiction, and that is the balance between respecting provincial jurisdictions. It has to flow both ways. And clearly, major pipeline projects that open up foreign markets, get our energy to Asia, to China, to India, and to Eastern Canada is clearly in the national interest.
That sounds like a yes.
Well, we do. We absolutely need to have a federal government that's willing to stand up. Because look, it's not just from time to time challenges with the government of Quebec. It's also the government of British Columbia right now. The NDP in British Columbia is doing everything it can to block a pipeline going to Western Canada. We can't hem in our natural resources and watch thousands of people lose their job, see tanker after tanker of foreign oil coming into the St. Lawrence, into Eastern Canadian markets, more and more manufacturing jobs being linked to the energy sector being lost. We need a government that's going to champion our clean energy, our energy that's extracted at the highest environmental standards, the highest labor standards. The proceeds go into fund services for Canadians. I'm happy to make that case everywhere in this country.
I want to ask you about the while we're here, I've asked you this many times before. I mean, we have this national debate over climate and carbon taxing. When are we going to see Andrew Scheer's plan? Why don't you want to get in on the debate?
You know, I'm happy to get on the debate. I'd love to debate the Liberals' environmental plan. The second they table one, they don't have an environmental plan. They have a revenue plan. They have a carbon tax that they admit won't reduce emissions, not going to meet, not going to meet their requirements. They've given a huge exemption to large industrial emitters. We know that it's not an environmental plan. There's no linkage between what they're doing and a reductions plan. They even admit that in order for this carbon tax to be effective, it'll have to be increased by a factor of 6. So we're still doing our job holding the government to account, saying how much will this carbon tax actually cost Canadians?
It seems to me at this point we're not going to see a plan from you until we get into an election campaign. Am I right?
Well, Justin Trudeau unveiled his carbon tax plan 2 months before the last election. Right now, we are making sure that Canadians understand that this carbon tax plan does nothing for the environment and just raises the cost of living for Canadians.
So am I right saying we won't see your plan until we get into a campaign?
You will see our plan with plenty of time for it to be scrutinized and analyzed, and we will be proud to defend it across the country.
Okay, migration. You got a lot of people saying, why are you opposed to the Global Migration Pact? Not a threat to sovereignty. In fact, raises other countries up to the standards. I mean, this is what they say. Raises other countries up to the standards Canada has, many of them introduced by your government. Your former immigration minister, Chris Alexander, says you're wrong in saying it's a threat to sovereignty. And people say, you know, this is appealing to a wedge issue that's not good for the country. We need immigrants in this country. And this is the kind of argument that, kind of conversation we shouldn't be having. How do you respond to that?
Well, Chris is wrong, and it's improper to conflate different aspects of an issue. Yes, there are things in the compact that we might agree with, and some are aspirational, ensuring that countries that might not have a great record on human rights can lift their standards up to Canadian standards. But it's also got a whole lot more in that. And just because there might be one or two things that we don't object to, doesn't mean that we therefore justify taking it on altogether. And the defense that it's not so bad because it's not binding, to me, speaks to the fact that there are actually some things that are problematic in it. And I will point out that previous court decisions have referenced international treaties and things that Canada have signed on to under the UN and other organizations as justification for a court decision. The act itself that governs our immigration and refugee system specifically says that international accords and agreements will factor into interpretation as well. So there are clear examples of how this type of agreement can influence Canadian decision making. And beyond that, there are problematic aspects of this compact. When there's a whole section talking about the government sensitizing the media and encouraging certain types of reporting, that to me enters into a space where the government goes way beyond its natural bounds.
We're stretching our time here a little bit, but I just want to finish. I want to give you a chance to talk about it. We've seen some polls narrowing the gap between you and the Liberals recently. What's the narrative as far as you're concerned as we head into 2019? I think we saw some of it in the House today with 24 questions. You asked every question from the official opposition side of the House today, you know, lamenting all what you believe are the failures of the Prime Minister. And what's the narrative you want to plant with Canadians as 2019 gets underway?
Well, it's precisely that the government is failing, and Justin Trudeau is failing on big issues. Failing to get our budget back under balance after he promised to do that. Failure to get pipelines built. You know, here we are. The Liberals took office after a previous Conservative government oversaw the building of 4 major pipeline projects. The 3 that were on the books are gone. 2 are completely dead because Justin Trudeau vetoed them, and the 3rd, Trans Mountain, is on life support. The cost of living getting higher and higher, and the government imposing new costs like the carbon tax. That's going to be a big part of it as well. So the narrative is that this government can't get the big things right, can't build anything in this country, threats to our economy because of higher costs, higher taxes, and an inability to stand up for Canadian sovereignty, especially when it comes to things like illegal border crossings. So that's going to be what we're offering Canadians, a compelling alternative vision where you have a government that can actually get things built, is focused on making life more affordable, responsible spending so that we don't leave future debts to the next generation of Canadians.
All right, Andrew Scheer, good to talk to you. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you too. All the best for the holidays.
Take care.